Good evening. The time is now 6 p.m. and I will call to order this hybrid public meeting. It is January 8th, 2025. My name is Julie Bond and I am the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. Regular meetings and public hearings of the Clark County Historic Preservation Commission are held in a hybrid format with both in-person and virtual participation options for commissioners, staff, and the public. This will allow for safe participation by commission members, staff, and any citizen interested in attending. For those of you joining remotely via computer, you should be able to see tonight's meeting agenda on your screen. If you can't see the screen and have joined by phone only, I will be announcing the agenda items as we move through the meeting's topics. Members of the public and applicants that have joined remotely are attendees. Other event participants cannot hear your audio unless you are acknowledged by the commission chair or staff and are unmuted. This evening's agenda is planned as follows: roll call and introductions, agenda approval, public comment for subjects other than public hearings on the meeting's agenda, as there will be specific public comment periods as part of hearings, updates from partner organizations, City of Vancouver demolition process update, executive session with possible action after, estimated for 30 minutes, old business, commission announcements and events, subcommittee updates, good of the order, and adjournment. We will now have a roll call of HPC members who are present for this meeting. Commission members, please say "I'm here" after I call your name. Jan Bader. Here. Morgan Fraser. Here. Andy Gregg.
Here.
Heidi Mandler Huff.
Here.
Elaine Thatcher.
Here.
Johnson Galley, I believe, is absent. And I am Julie Bond. I'm here. We have an agenda amendment approval on today's agenda. The continued public hearing for the Stenger House Certificate of Appropriateness was scheduled to occur at this meeting. However, the applicant informed the City of Vancouver staff that they have chosen to withdraw the application. Is there any discussion or questions for staff on this agenda amendment?
It's Commissioner Gregg. I was wondering if applicant gave a reason and if it regarded one of the finance requests they had.
Hello, Andy. This is Jason with the City of Vancouver. I seem to recall from the email that it was either Mark or Anthony had sent that it had to do with the recent loss of some board members that were associated with this project. So they just did not have the manpower to move it forward at this point in time.
Thanks, Jason. I missed that part. Appreciate it.
Does anyone else online have questions? Okay. I did want to ask, do you know if they hope to come in a future time?
I do not know.
Okay.
My impression from my conversation with Anthony is that yes, maybe in the summer when they reconstitute their board.
Okay. Well, thank you. So with that, I will take a motion to amend the agenda to remove the Stenger House Certificate of Appropriateness hearing from tonight's meeting because the application is withdrawn. Do I have a motion?
I move. Thank you.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. I believe that was Heidi. And now we will have a voice vote. And all those in favor say aye.
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 All those not in favor say no. All right, the motion passes. Thank you. We'll now move into the public comment. We will now take public comment on any items outside of public hearing items. We will begin with attendees in the room. Please approach the microphone if you would like to make a comment. I see one person in the room. Okay, they are not going to make a public comment. We will now take public comment from online attendees. Susan, can you please read the instructions?
Yes. If you're using the WebEx application on a computer, tablet, or smartphone, if you would like to make a comment, please raise your virtual hand. There are instructions on the screen on how to do this. For anyone on the telephone, please dial *3 on your phone's number panel to raise your hand. Staff will be able to see hands once they are raised and will request to unmute you one at a time. Please note, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per person in order to accommodate all speakers. We have a few folks online, but I am not seeing any raised hands. I think that's for partner updates.
Okay. Can we check with her? Holly, we see your hand raised. Is that for public comment or is that for partner updates?
Holly, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
I was preparing for partner updates.
Okay, thank you. I just didn't want to overlook you if you did want to make a public comment. Okay,
you.
thank you. This concludes the general public comment portion of the meeting. We'll now hear updates from partner organizations. We will begin with our regular update from the Historic Trust. Go ahead, Holly.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners, staff, and guests. This is Holly Chamberlain from the Historic Trust. The Small Business Incubator Rental Assistance Program at Providence Academy has just started this week and has already attracted several interested businesses which have scheduled tours of potential spaces. The Trust does agreement with IBR project staff regarding the latter's finding of no adverse effect on the Academy was submitted by project staff to the Federal Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. The Council has addressed the concerns expressed repeatedly by the Trust and found that IBR staff must treat the Academy as if there will be adverse effects and provide mitigation. Furthermore, the ACHP reminded project staff that mitigation can be applied beyond the boundaries of the area of potential effect. The Academy event facility staff reports that they exceeded their stretch goal for bookings in 2024 with a total of 77 events. 54 events are already booked for 2025. The Marshall House docents provided over 1,100 tours in 2024 for a total of about 2,350 guests. The preservation crew is working on the turnover for one of the NCO duplexes. When it is ready, a public open house will be held as usual for people who have signed up for site rental updates. Due to the closure of the International Air and Hospitality Academy and its culinary training program, the mess hall is empty of a tenant for the first time since circa 2005. Once the building is cleaned, renovations can begin for a new tenant. The extent of remodeling will depend largely on whether a new tenant needs a commercial kitchen. A problem with drivers parking illegally on the grass borders of Evergreen Boulevard at the eastern end of the row has been addressed by the Trust and NPS with the installation of temporary caution tape barriers. So far, this has proven effective. The Marshall Youth and Adult Leadership Award nomination process produced 17 adult candidates and 60 youth candidates. The annual leadership workshop is coming up this Saturday. Trust staff welcomed new addition Tiffany Lounsbury as development assistant. Public education and engagement programs in 2024 attracted about 1,770 participants. The First Humanities Washington program of 2025 is set for February 6th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Red Cross Building. LaToya Brackett, Associate Professor of African American Studies at the University of Puget Sound, will speak on They Want Our Rhythm But Don't Want Our Blues, African American Innovation Through Pop Culture. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you, Holly. Are there any other partner organizations that wish to give an update?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. This concludes the partner update portion of this meeting. We will now move to new business. This evening, we have a presentation from City of Vancouver staff to provide an overview of the demolition process for buildings in the city. Jason Nortz and the city's development review manager will lead this discussion. And Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes. Good evening, Chair Bond and fellow commissioners. Jason Nortz, Development Review Manager, City of Vancouver. I also have with me this evening Tricia Jedemeyer, who's the Assistant City Attorney for the City of Vancouver, and she's available this evening for questions at the conclusion of the presentation. The item before you this evening is an overview of the demolition process, specifically in the heritage overlay districts in the City of Vancouver. Next slide. The objective of this evening's presentation is to provide an overview of the demolition process for buildings located in the heritage overlay districts. And is also a summary of the staff of the packet that included the memorandum. Essentially a summary of that, excuse me. Next slide, please. So for starters, I thought it was important to point out where our heritage overlay districts are and what the purpose of the district is. So Heritage Overlay District number 1 is the Providence Academy site. Heritage Overlay District number 2 includes the stretches of Main Street, both sides of Main Street between 5th and 11th Street. The purpose of the historic overlay districts are to preserve special architectural character and to also preserve historical significance. So I thought that was important to point out in the context of this evening's conversation. Next slide. Excuse me. Now I'm going to go over the demo process for structures that are within the Heritage Overlay District. So structures listed on the state, national, or Clark County Register or deemed eligible or potentially eligible to be listed and located in the historic overlay district are subject to specific procedures identified in VMC 2510-050, and that is the heritage overlay section of the Vancouver Municipal Code. So a historic overlay district structure as identified in that section of the code can only be demolished in one of two following ways. The first way is if it is asked of our building official to make a determination of an unfit building, which follows the process identified in VMC 1732, which is a chapter within our building code. The other way would be any other building that is not deemed unfit and would come before you all as a demolition request. That would follow the procedures outlined in 2510-050. So the next few slides, I'm going to go over both of those processes in greater detail. Next slide. So an unfit building request follows the process identified, as I mentioned earlier, in VMC 1732, which is part of the city's building code. The purpose of that chapter is to allow buildings that are unfit for human habitation and unsafe for other uses to be subject to demo, repair, or being vacated. Certain conditions must be met for the building official to deem a building unfit. For example, structural damage from fire, earthquake, flood, etc., that results in the building no longer meeting the minimal code requirements. That's just one example. That section of the code actually includes 19 conditions total. Not every condition needs to be met. The code is specific that is so long as one condition is met, the building official could potentially deem that building unfit. Next slide, please. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Would you like us to ask questions as you go along, or would you like us to save them to the end?
I think it would be better if you could save them for the end.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So again, with the unfit building demolition process, the determination of whether a building should be repaired, demolished, should be based on the degree of structural deterioration of that building and the relationship that the estimated cost of repairs bear to the value of the actual building. So those are the two things that the building official would look at in his authority when determining if a building can be determined unfit. Next slide, please. And then there are standards that we apply to this. The following standards shall be followed in substance in order to determine repair, remediation, vacation, or demolition of a building. So 40% or more of the building is damaged or deteriorated in value. If the cost of repair or remediation would exceed the value of the building, and if it's a fire hazard. If the building cannot be reasonably repaired, then the building official may order its demolition. And we can talk more about that, and I will talk more about that in greater detail throughout this presentation. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to talk about that second way a building could be demoed. And that, what I'm titling is all other buildings in the heritage overlay that are not considered or deemed unfit. So the first process would be that essentially it would involve a traditional, excuse me, I'm getting sidetracked here. They would submit an application for a demolition, which includes a report that demonstrates preservation is not feasible due to an economic hardship. The report needs to include reasons why the building cannot be repaired, restored, or renovated. So that is what would come before you all, is a demolition request, and the applicant would be showing you why the building cannot be restored or repaired. The report needs to include 9 items, and those examples of those 9 items, I did not list them all, but they are in that code section, would include an analysis of reasonable economic alternatives to demolition, and the most recent assessed value and present property taxes levied. So if an economic hardship can be proved, then the HPC or the zoning official, and I'll get more into that in a second, they can then approve that demolition request. Next slide, please. So now I would like to talk a little bit more about the review processes for demo requests within the heritage overlay. So for registered buildings, the HPC will review the application and associated reports and recommend approval or denial of the permit. So a good example of this would be if the academy came before you, it's listed as a registered building, and they came before you with a demo request, you would have the authority to make the decision on that demolition because it is listed as a registered building. An eligible building, the city planning official makes the decision with consultation from the HPC. And then finally, the unfit building, only the building official makes the decision. So a good example of that would be the boiler and laundry building where they asked for an unfit determination. The building official made that determination, ordered its demolition. He was the one that had the authority to do that. So those are the kind of the 3 different processes that the demolition application would go.
Jason, I'm sorry. I know I've said I wouldn't interrupt you, but I'm unclear. When you said the boiler was an example of an unfit, it was also a registered. So I'm curious why that didn't fall under a register building example as opposed to the unfit.
I may have misspoke. I do believe you're right, but I'm just looking at it from the context of because it was deemed unfit in order to be demolished. It did not have to go back to you all.
So even though it was on the register, because the building official felt it was unfit
And deemed it
so, and we no longer had the ability to reject that,
and ordered it demolished. You no longer had the ability
to,
do anything involving that.
okay,
Because, right, it's under 1732.
right.
Okay, and I'll explain the nuances between when a building official deems a building unfit and orders its outright demolition versus a repair or remediation, what that looks like. And I'll touch on that in just a second.
Thank you.
So, excuse me, there is, one second, I'm battling a cold. There are 4 specific criteria for approval that the HPC would need to follow, and if it were before the planning official, would need to follow for approving a demolition request. The extent to which the demolition of the building would have a serious adverse impact on the cultural significance of the Heritage Overlay District, the extent to which the building is so deteriorated and so lacking in historical fabric that it would not be viable to retain the historical significance of the building through rehab. There's no reasonable alternative to demolition that would provide the owner with a reasonable economic return, and the extent to which the denial would deprive the owner of reasonable economic use of the underlying property. So those are the criteria for approval that you all in your decision-making capacity or the planning official would make in determining if they could approve the demolition request. Now I'd like to touch on what happens after the review process and in the event that there is an appeal. So for a registered building, City Council hears appeals of those decisions made, and only the party of record can appeal the decision. For eligible buildings, the hearings examiner hears the appeals of decisions made by the planning official, and any affected party may appeal that decision. And for unfit buildings, City Council hears appeals of the decisions made by the building official. And again, only the party of record can appeal the decision. Next slide, please. And now, at the request of some of the commissioners, I was asked to share some recent examples in the context of demo to kind of give you, maybe help your understanding of the demolition process. So an obvious, most recent example is the Academy Boiler Laundry Smokestack project. So that was deemed unfit per VMC 1732. However, the building official ordered that building, specifically the smokestack, to be repaired. The applicant chose to then come before the HPC with a demolition request. So because they did that, you then had the ability to review that in your capacity. It was a registered building. You're able to review it. But because the economic criteria that's identified in that section of the overlay could not be met, you agreed to approve the demolition request. So that's an example of a registered building, which is somewhat nuanced in that it didn't come before you just as a traditional demo request. It went the route of unfit, but the building official did not outright order its demolition. He ordered it repaired or remediated. Next slide, please. So another recent example, and I've been asked this, I think, by a couple of commissioners, the Vancouver Funeral Home property on 12th and Main. So no HPC review is required for that property because it is just outside of our Heritage Overlay District, and it was not a registered building. Therefore, it was able to be demolished. But under our new standards that we implemented, because I believe it was over 50 years old, we followed that process of photo documentation and updating our records and keeping records of that in perpetuity. So we followed that process for this specific site. So I just wanted to follow up on that. I know questions were asked specific to that location. So that concludes my presentation. I'm sure I was so thorough that you have no questions whatsoever. But with that, the very next slide does say discussion. So I anticipate some.
Thank you, Jason. All right, I see Morgan's hand is to Morgan, and I will go to everyone online first before we go to the people in-house. So Morgan, go ahead.
Thanks, Jason, for that great presentation. I just want to clarify, it's the very first slide. Our district is larger than you described, correct? We haven't changed our district because our district should still include not only Main Street, right? But the area along 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, Evergreen, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
I just want to clarify that hasn't changed while I was in Missouri.
No, you're absolutely right. And it was more for the sake of brevity on the slide. I didn't want to overwhelm you with too much text, but yes, you're absolutely right. It hasn't changed. It does include 5th Street and 11th Street in that half block area north of 11th Street.
Excellent. I just wanted to make sure something didn't change while I was out of the state.
Nope.
But thank you very much. It was a really well put together presentation. I do think in regards to the resources that you used as examples, those are perfect examples. I think the funeral home went through a lot more review than at the state level. But I think that those were great examples, and thank you. That was what I wanted to say at this moment.
Thanks, Morgan. All right, I am looking for hands. I know Holly's is raised, but I think that's a carryover. Okay, you guys are still welcome to comment if you want to, if you have a question that comes up, but in the meantime, I will look in the room to see if anyone here has a question or comment.
Anne's raising her hand.
I'm sorry, who is?
Jan.
Jan, sorry, Jan, I don't see your hand. There it is. Okay, Jan, go ahead.
Hey, Jason, I just want to clarify on slide 7. So if you can go back to that, or Bart can go back to that. Because you said it's not 40% cost of repair and a fire hazard, those are three separate criteria, right? So it's not cumulative. It's not 40% more damaged and it's a fire hazard. It's one of the, or more than those, but those are, and you had an and in the presentation. I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't the case.
So you're essentially saying that all three need to be, is your question that all three need to be met, or?
It sounded like the way you presented it, that the standards were 40% or more damaged if the cost of repair remediation exceeds the value and it's a fire hazard. So that those first two also had the fire hazard piece. So I just wanted to clarify.
No, it's an or.
Okay, just
Sorry.
checking. Okay, that's it.
Thanks, Jen. All right, I'm looking at the other faces that I see, and I don't see any hands. Okay. Elaine and I are the only ones in the room on the commission, so I will just check with the co-chair to see if she has any questions.
Yes, I have questions. Thank you, Julie. Trying to organize them. So if you have them formed in your brain, I'll let you go first and then I'll form them.
Okay, sure. So I did have a question on slide 5, just to help orient to the topic. There are 19 conditions to determine if a building is unfit. And my question is unreinforced masonry one of those?
Unreinforced masonry is one of those. What? I didn't hear your first part.
One of those 19 conditions that have to be met under VMC 1732.
Good question.
There are 19. Let me see. I do. That's why I said just give me a second. It doesn't specifically call out unreinforced masonry. A lot of the conditions speak more to the overall structural integrity. So things that could affect the structural integrity, which as we know through like the smokestack, for example, that unreinforced masonry, the condition that it was in, did affect the overall structural integrity of that structure. It doesn't so specifically call out unreinforced masonry.
Okay, thank you. And then I also wanted to ask, we use the term reasonable a lot, and I believe there are parameters around reasonable. So one of them would be if a building cannot be reasonably repaired, then they could order demolition. I think in relation to that, it's the relationship that the estimated cost of repair bears to the value of the dwelling, building, structure, or premise. So how do we determine that? I know that I think there's an equation in the code, some kind of percentage. And then, so if that's yes, there's a formula, or there's a specific kind of objective way to measure that. Then is there a requirement that the homeowner, if they're interested in demolition and they have an invested interest in getting an unfit determination, is there a requirement that they use an independent company to verify that, so that those cost estimates have integrity?
There's not a requirement, But I will say that as staff, and I can only go off of one example because this has only happened once in my role with the city of Vancouver, and that was with the smokestack, boiler, and laundry buildings. And we did request that the applicant, because there's a lot of economics associated with that when you're trying to show value, that we did have them provide us with, I think, 3 separate economic analysis that were able to support their claim that it no longer was economically viable for them to retain that.
Can
But
I-
it's not a requirement that they need to go out to, if they're able to do that themselves. We peer review that. We actually have a third-party structural plans examiner that works for the city that we will send this information to peer review. More of the structural, not the economics. We will review that economic analysis based on what's given to us from their consultant.
Okay. And you said something that triggered another question, but I'll maybe go back to that in a second. My other question is, we talk a lot about, a building being unfit because it has deteriorated to a certain point and it's damaged and there's, obvious structural problems. Is there consideration within the code that recognizes some property owners are seeking demolition by neglect, particularly historic structures, and that we would actually penalize them for doing such and not rewarding them for doing so and demolishing those historic structures?
That's a great question, and I know why you're asking that question, but the code does not speak to that.
Okay.
No.
Okay. And I apologize. I know I've been talking for a lot. But I did want to ask, and it may be a little blunt, but but we're friendly. Under the review process on page 9, it does say under registered buildings that the HPC will review the application and the reports and recommend approval or denial of a demolition permit. And I guess I just wanted to ask, can the city override the HPC's decision? In some capacity?
If it were appealed. So if you skip ahead to slide number 11. So if somebody were to file an appeal, which can only be that the party record can appeal the decision, then city council would hear that decision. And if city council decided to overturn your decision, that would ultimately be up to them.
And it looks like, according to the appeal process, that the HPC could not be part of the party of, like, they couldn't be a part of that meeting. It would just be between the city council and the party of record.
What do you mean couldn't be
So-
part of the meeting?
I guess what I mean is if the HPC denied it and said, no, you can't demo, we ask that you repair, and it was appealed by the homeowner or whatever, the owner of the record, party of record, to the city council to say, no, we really want to demo, we couldn't go to that meeting to demonstrate our case of why we denied them the demolition.
So the way that I think of that, and I don't generally do administrative hearings, and so I can check back with a colleague who does those regularly and get that answer to the commission very quickly. The way that I would think of that is that the HPC is the initial reviewer, right? The approver, denier. And then if a party, just like in court, if a party doesn't agree with the decision, they may appeal the decision, and then it goes to the next level where it has that level of review, and that's that appeal process. And so whether or not the initial decision maker then states their case to the city council as part of making their decision, I don't know. But the party withstanding in that case is the party who has had the
rejection,
favorable or unfavorable based on their perspective decision made.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but I can confirm.
Okay. That would be great. I just am curious for future. I don't know if there will be, but if we would just, not attend the appeal process to demonstrate the reasons or the rationale behind our decision, or if that would just,
That would be in the record.
okay,
It would be in
that's-
the record
okay.
of your decision. And so
that'd be part of that consideration in the appeal.
I'm sorry that I
Okay.
don't have the
That's okay.
exact process right in front of
That's
me.
okay.
But I suspect that is already set forth in the process of what record they review.
Okay.
I would expect that it's a closed record. However, I just need to confirm it.
Okay, thank you. And then I do remember my one last question before I turn it over to Elaine. You had mentioned that, we have these independent economic people who can verify the economic analysis and all of those different things. And I don't want to open a can of worms, but I do recall that we had a citizen come forward with with an appeal to the applicant that they were willing to pay for an independent review and economic analysis of the structure. They had a professional that had a background in doing an economic analysis and also quotes for lighthouses and other historic structures throughout the country. And that was never allowed. And I'm curious why that wasn't enforced, that they be required to get that independent, professional, outside perspective to demonstrate that, there were other economic options, but the applicant really dug in their heels and declined allowing that to move forward. And I'm just curious how that could happen if they are, if they're expected to have this economic analysis that's.
Yeah, I recall that as well. But there's nothing that we can do since we're not the applicant of the project. We can't compel the applicant and owner to use a resource that they don't want to use. I mean, that's not something we can force them to do. There's nothing specific in the code that requires us to even say you need to use, X amount of analysis done by this. I mean, we can't do that as a city entity.
I guess what I mean is, I hear that, and I guess at the time I was just curious because they weren't going to have any kind of all they needed to do was give access to the smokestack. They didn't need to spend a dime. They just need to give them access so they could go and do their structural analysis. And so I guess I'm just thinking kind of broader, big picture with other structures. When applicants come to us with the desire to demo, and that's, the code is kind of written as if the owner doesn't want demo and we're trying to enforce demo. It seems to me that if the applicant is invested in demolition, then we're kind of going against the current to try and get them to really show us, okay, there's a rational, objective reason for this. And when they decline these, very generous offers from the public to say, we have experts who really can come in here and give an analysis. And if you're estimating millions and millions, can you let us at least see if there's another option? And when they say no, it's hard for us to believe that all due diligence has been put on the table. And so I guess there's nothing we can do now. It's done, it's over. But in the future, how do we, as a commission, is that something we have no kind of control over? And we just, if we get those kinds of public offerings and they're rejected by the applicant, we have no kind of ability to encourage them to please go ahead and do that. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. I understand.
We don't have any recourse.
No, you do not.
Thank you. I'm done with my questions and I'll move it over to Elaine. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Chair Bond. So I have a couple questions. Julie and yours discussion helped answer some of mine. One of mine relates to slide 6, where it talks about the relationship with the estimated cost of repairs bears value against the dwindling building or dwelling structure building premise. Is it taken into consideration if there are other avenues to support the funding repair, like grants that could be applied for or sponsors that would like to add funding so it wouldn't be solely on the applier?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know with a recent example that there was grant information and outside funding that was potentially available for a project, and we steered the applicant in that direction. But again, there's nothing that we as a city can require them to do to force them to do that. I mean, have strongly encouraged that, they take a look at these things but there's nothing that, if they choose not to go down that path, there's nothing in our code that would require them to do so.
Yes, I understood that. I was wondering if when they're going through the unfit building determination, if it's something their commission or their board looks at in the determining phase. So not the applicant, but the board looks.
I see what you're saying. So if, the value of the building was X and, the required monies to repair would be Y,
Y.
but then you're getting X, so much money from a grant, then that kind of,
Putting that in there.
well, yes. And again, this is all, we've had one project that has gone the unfit route. So I don't have any analysis or examples or other data that I can provide you. That's a great point. And I think for future projects that may come forward with unfit requests, that is something that I think that we have the ability as the city to ask for in our review of their economic analysis. Absolutely. Have you taken into consideration this additional funding that is out there? And if it's $1 million, does that then bridge the gap?
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing in our code that specifically says that or requires us to ask them to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. On page 7, there's a line that says, if this building cannot be reasonably repaired. Is there like a standard that it has to be reasonably repaired to? Is it like you must be at original glory in 12 months? Is it, you have to be 20% repaired in 6 months? What does reasonably repaired lead to?
It's rather, let's just say gray at best. I think if you're looking at, there's 19 conditions, right, that I referenced before that could cause a building to be deemed unfit. And let's say that, 16 of those conditions were met. I think we could say that, maybe it can't be reasonably repaired. I think that's something that the building official and his role looks at in his review of that. And then again, with his consultation with the BFCC, and then not only the overall, structural analysis of the building itself that he would look at, but also the economics. So then in addition to, there's multiple code cases, we've fenced off the building. And then on top of that, the building no longer has the value that it used to have. And we have an economic analysis that shows that it's not cost effective to do the repair versus the demo. I think in his mind, then he would say that it can no longer reasonably be repaired. I don't think we go so far as to define that term.
I think that the reasonableness inquiry is going to be tied to the factual inquiry. And in each case, the facts will be very different. And so I think what's reasonable in one case may not be reasonable in another case. If there have been, which I do not know off the top of my head, but if there have been appeals of unfit building determinations and council reviewed it, there could be something in the record that would give us some assistance to look at and say, oh, this is what we think of as reasonable, or this is what council thought of as reasonable in the review process, right? So that's one way that we could look at that. But generally, I think that's going to be highly fact specific based on whatever's happening with that particular dwelling.
Yeah, can I tag on to that question before you go to your next?
Go ahead.
So, sorry, I don't know. My brain has all these things happening in it. Say what you just said one more. It depends. So, okay, sorry. Does the BFCC or the building commissioner, preservation is very different. Say repairs for preservation has a different lens than just repairing a building in other ways. And so it does seem to me that we're looking at things as if it were, say, a modern day building that had certain requirements and certain code needs and so forth. Whereas historic buildings have, in many cases, have exemptions from some of those various codes. So do we know, or is there some kind of provision so that the building commissioner is taking that historic element and that historic context into their analysis? Or are they just looking at it as if it were just like, you know, the standard kind of building?
The building official is using the standards that are called out in 1732. He is strictly concerned with life safety and life safety only, and minimal building code and fire code requirements. He's not looking at it from the standpoint of anything related to historic preservation.
So most of our questions sound like we would need code revisions to address some of these concerns. It sounds like. Is that right?
Because 1732 is entirely outside the HPC process, I don't think that a code revision to that section would be unrelated, right? Because an unfit building is an unfit building is an unfit building, right? In this HOD situation, then there is this whole other section of the code in which the HPC comes into play, depending on whether it's a registered building or an eligible building in that HOD. But they're bifurcated processes.
I guess my only concern about that, though, is that there is a provision within that code that allows us to be bypassed. And so we're not always necessarily a part of the equation in that decision. So I believe that we will, I know you have it in your notes, or you had it in your presentation or in your memo, but basically, you know, a building official can determine that a building is unfit and not need to come to the commission.
Because of the life safety issue that
Yes.
Jason just addressed. And so I think segmenting it, you are absolutely correct that section of the code does specifically say that 100% accurate. And what it is doing is saying, this is a carve out. It's not an exception like a workaround. This is a matter that properly belongs in 17.32 because it's a life safety health issue rather than belonging here. And so it's not so much, I think, as a workaround as it is just a clarity that sometimes we have to look to another place because we have other concerns. Is that
Strictly life safety.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a couple more questions. That one I think we've answered. So my next one is split between 2 pages. I think the first page is, okay. To deem an unfit building, you have to fall into one of 19 criteria. Thank you. But on criteria for approval on page 10, there are 4 requirements and all 4 of them need to be met. Is that correct?
Excuse me. Specific to, this is criteria for approval within the Heritage Overlay District.
Yes.
Yes. So just for the Heritage Overlay District, what you're referencing is those 19 conditions that need to be met are specific to an entirely different chapter, the unfit chapter. So it's not.
Okay,
The same.
sorry. My question is pertaining to, I wasn't here for the smokestack, but from what I heard, they went to the unfit building thing and the person said it wasn't an unfit building. They said repair and then they came over to us. And then because it didn't meet all 4 of ours, it was then demolished?
It specifically, I'll have to go back and look at that in greater detail, but then that got into the issue of reasonable alternative demolition that would provide the owner with reasonable economic, it got into the economic side of things, because if you look at, just give me a second here. It specifically says that they're required to submit an application for demo, which includes a report that demonstrates preservation is not feasible due to an economic hardship. And that was those numerous reports that they submitted specific to the Academy Smokestack project that clearly showed there was an economic hardship.
Okay.
And you all agreed when you made the decision. I
Well,
shouldn't
not
say-
me because I wasn't here.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, so that was demolished because of economic hardship on the owner's part, not provide that it wouldn't do a reasonable economic return. I guess the reasonable economic return part is confusing me because we don't only protect stores or things that bring in money. We also protect monuments and homes and things of that. So I'm wondering about this criteria because some historic pieces don't bring in money. So I'm wondering why it's one of our criteria.
It's only referencing built structures. It's not reference, I think.
But
I
built
this is
homes-
The building code, right, for buildings and structures rather than for historic.
No,
is-
the criteria
when-
for approval is in the Heritage Overlay District specifically.
A good question.
I guess I don't have an answer to your question. I'd have to look at that one in greater detail.
Awesome. If you could look into that and let me know or let us know for future, I'd be really curious about that. And I think that's the rest of my questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elaine. I'm looking to see if this has triggered any questions from our participants online. I'm going to look at the camera to see if anybody has a hand raised.
Jan.
Jan. Okay, sorry, Jen. I haven't gotten to you yet. But if you have your hand raised, wonderful. Please go ahead.
Jason, I just want to clarify, because I was confused about this. So the Preservation Commission, we're a regulatory body. We get to actually make decisions on the historic structures, et cetera. The Building and Fire Code Commission is an advisory body, right? They're not the ones that are legally making the decision. They're providing advice to the building official, correct? So he's the decision maker.
Great question, Jan. In the context of an unfit determination, the building official is not required to go before the Building and Fire Code Commission. It's more of a courtesy and a consultation that he chooses to do that. But the Building and Fire Code Commission does specifically have authority to make decisions, or actually, I will have to check the code specific to this, but they are called out to be able to make decisions when there are code changes related to building and fire codes, or if there's a potential appeal to something related to that, then they are used in a different capacity than they would be for an unfit building determination. But for unfit, there's nothing that requires the building official to go before the Building and Fire Code Commission.
Okay, so in that context, which is what we're talking about, they're advisory rather than.
Advisory only. They make no decision. It's Tree, and before he's making his determination, he's consulting with a body of experts and providing, the applicant is presumably providing them information. Tree's providing him his information and analysis to help him be able to make an informed decision. But ultimately, that decision lies with the building official. They're advisory.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yep.
Thank you, Jan. All right, I don't see any other hands online. I did have one more question, and I think will be simple. So I'm just going to read from your memo here. It says buildings that are deemed unfit and ordered for demolition by the city building official are not required to obtain the HPC's or planning official approval for demolition. My question is, can we appeal that as a commission?
Tricia, could you unmute, please?
So sorry about that. No, because the appeal process for unfit buildings goes to city council and only the party of record appeals that decision. So if,
Meaning the property owner.
indeed,
And so if the property owner wants demolition, they would have no incentive to appeal. So if other interested parties want to, they just simply can't.
that's what the code says.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for doing this presentation. We have been craving it. Obviously, we had a lot of questions, so we really appreciate you coming and talking through these things with us. I know you had a few follow-up items. I didn't capture them. Hopefully you remember what they were. But thank you again from all of us for being here and talking to us.
Yeah, thank you for the time.
All right, moving forward on our agenda. We will now recess the regular meeting for 30 minutes to hold an executive session with possible related action after pursuant to RCW 4230-110-1I. We will reconvene at 7:25 o'clock. This meeting is now in recess and we will reconvene in 30 minutes.
The 4 commissioners online, please use the executive session. If you have any issues logging into that meeting, please email Susan. We will be in the neighboring room. Thank you.
This is Chair Bond, and we are going to extend the executive session by another 15 minutes. We will reconvene at 7:40. This is Chair Bond. We are going to extend the executive session by another 10 minutes. We will reconvene at 7:50. Great. The executive session is now concluded. The time is 7:50, and I call the public meeting back to order. We will now move to old business. First, Susan will provide a brief budget update. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you. So I just wanted to give you an update about the funds that were spent at the end of the year. We've got a couple examples here in the room, which I know those of you online may probably can't see, but we were, oh, and thank you, Bart. We were able to get, I'm sorry, I'm trying to do 2 things at once and I'm not very good at that. We were able to get the canopy, which we talked about previously, a table cover, which you can see here. We had some conversations with internal staff about the types of materials that could be purchased for giveaway to members of the public. And we were encouraged to purchase materials that had little value because of a state law. And I will probably not be able to tell you a whole lot about this state law, but it's gift of public funds that the idea of a basket, like we had talked about, putting a bunch of stuff in a basket and giving it away, would be contrary to provisions within that state law of regarding gift of public funds. And so we got decals and stickers and magnets and window clings, and we have quite a few of those, so we'll be able to give those away. We also got a retractable banner, which has pictures and text about several historic properties, and it's a conversation starter for people who might be stopping by a booth or a table. We also got heated chairs, a table and chairs with wheels, an ice chest, and a folding rolling cart. So we got quite a few materials and expended a good amount of the remaining budget. And I guess I would if you have any questions, let me know. And if anyone has any suggestions for how we work on the 2025 budget, I'm happy to have a discussion about that as well.
I was actually, whoa, that was loud. I was actually just about to ask if we have the 2025 budget because one of the things that I'm going to encourage with the outreach committee is that we meet soon and start mapping out events that we would like to go to and ways that we could spend down the 2025 budget before the end of the year.
Well, and this is Bart. Keep in mind that there was an additional $5,000. And so the money is given biannually from the city of Vancouver for the commission to use. It's now $10,400 per year. And the $10,400 needs to be used by December 31st of each year. Looking backwards the last couple of years, the conferences and trainings and the memberships and things like that we regularly send commissioners to, or for the things that we do with the museum, that takes up most of the 10,000. And so this extra money that we were looking for something long-term, durable to use for outreach and promotion of the commission was kind of a one-off
Well,
event.
did we have those additional funds in 2023? Because I remember at the end of the year, we had to spend down that as well and get library books.
Susan would know. I don't remember.
That was a one-time extra $5,000 that only happened in 2024. But we did have budget that was left over in 2023, and we did spend it down for library books. And so depending on the other activities that commissioners do, then we may have leftover budget to spend at the end of this year as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, next, Bart and Susan will discuss the 2024 budget surplus outreach material purchases. I'm sorry, I know you just did that. I guess I was looking at the funds available, and I was thinking maybe that was a balance that you wanted to address that I think, may have lost out on. Is that right? This 2,125? Okay. I'm assuming there's nothing much to say other than,
Yeah, not
That's
much to
it.
say, other than we did our very best. And we had been planning on spending more of it, but we had that discussion about the amount we could spend on items. And with the lower priced items, we didn't want 5,000 stickers because we just
Yeah,
didn't think we.
that
could
makes sense.
use
No.
5,000 stickers, so.
yeah, the money will probably be put to better use wherever it returns to.
It goes back to the city's general fund, so it doesn't disappear.
Okay. Thank you so much for that update. I appreciate it. And I agree with Elaine, moving the budget into the agenda early on in the year, which we'll discuss, I guess, on our next agenda meetings. But I think that'll be helpful for us to plan more proactively if we can. Thanks for that
And
suggestion.
Chair Bone, if I could just add one thing, as the purchases came together and we worked with the printing company up in Hazeldale, what we really endeavored to do was create a group of items that could be checked out by one or more commissioners. They'll live at the county and they can go to events. So things could go inside a gym, like at National History Competition, or we could do tabling at the farmer's market, or lots of other things. And so I think this is a real positive step for the commission to have this kind of turnkey stuff to really get out there, like Commissioner Gregg has been talking about for years. And with Commissioner Zingali's help and Commissioner Thatcher's help and enthusiasm, I think we can make use of it.
Excellent.
I also wanted to say thank you, both Bart and Susan, for all the last minute legwork you had to do, finding out about that rule, making sure everything was put together. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yep. All right. We'll now move on to announcements and updates. This is an opportunity for any commissioners to provide any announcements or event reminders that you would like other commissioners to know about. So I will turn it over to you all. And I will look online to see if you have a hand raised. I see a no from a couple of people. Okay. Any in the room? All right. Thank you. There are no announcements for today. Next, we will hear any updates from subcommittees that we haven't already talked about, which this week we have not. So we will, I believe that we have the demolition on here as a standing item. Correct me if I'm wrong, Morgan, but I believe that the demolition subcommittee may have already accomplished their purpose. And I don't know if it's continuing as a subcommittee.
It's like a shadow subcommittee of Bart and me and trying to get some literature and some things moving in the county's direction. But only Bart would know if there's an update because I've been kind of out of town.
Been gone. Yeah.
Now, the last I spoke with Jason, he feels like the city projects have been taken. The loop has been closed on the city projects, and so I agree with Morgan. Now in the new year, and I will definitely need to lean on Susan's expertise with her experience at the county, but we need to work with the building official and try to mirror as much of that process as we can within the county's permitting. So,
Okay.
Yeah, we need to set up a meeting in the next month.
And I have one request, being on the design and website subcommittee. We have a section that we have discussed creating regarding our demolition ordinance or our demolition kind of practices. And since there has been that revision on, ensuring anything over 50 years is documented, maybe having a small paragraph or write-up explaining that change. And then we could also reference the code sections that deal with demolition to put on there. So just a request if we could work with you guys on getting something, and we can talk more offline, but just to put a little bug in your ear about that. I think it would be helpful.
Yeah, we might ask Jason just because he probably has something already crafted.
Perfect. Okay. All right. And then the next subcommittee is the design review and webpage. We don't have any demonstrations today, but we are making a lot of progress. We are getting down to our last 3 subjects on our website, and that is the nomination process, the initiatives, and then we're, 4 subjects. And then we have a new section that we're creating for projects, and that's where we want to house our grant report outs when we, after the year's over and our subgrantees have performed their grant proposal wonders, and we want to house their report outs there. And we also will put our surveys, like we have a mid-century survey, and we have some other things. So we're creating a project section on our website. And then our last and extremely important is our mapping, and really updating and making our mapping and our listings much more user-friendly and robust and exciting. So we have a lot of fun things coming up, but we are on our way, and we will do a, showcase later on, but I just want to let you know. And Susan and Jan, but Susan has done some amazing work on revising our COA application. And so we're in the process of finalizing that. So that will be showcased later on. And we are also, she's also working on some revisions to the nomination form, which will be a really nice change. And we're going to work with the county on making sure that that's in alignment with their needs, but really good changes and updates that we have been working on. So major acknowledgement to Jan and Susan for all their hard work. So we'll do more updates soon. Thank you. Thank you, Morgan. Actually, I appreciate that. Okay, next, outreach. Do you have any updates or announcements?
No report.
Yeah, during the holiday season, everyone was busy. I was out of commission. But I am hoping I'm going to reach out to the others or have Bart reach out to everyone and see if we can get something set up in the next couple of weeks so we can get planning on 2025.
Absolutely. We need to pick some calendar dates and work towards them for events.
Great. Thank you. All right. You're getting some kudos from Morgan. I hope you guys are seeing her fun little emojis. All right. So now we are moving on to the good of the order. The good of the order, as we all know, is an opportunity for us to do shout outs or kudos to people on the commission or make any kind of comments before we adjourn. And so Morgan has her hand raised. So go ahead, Morgan.
I just want to thank Commissioner Bond and Vice Chair Thatcher for all of your hard work with the demolition, understanding and the letter, and being one with all of our frustration.
I'd like to do a for good of the order to Commissioner Fraser, who is here late at night on her birthday. So thank you very much and happy birthday.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I'm scrolling through the images just to make sure I don't miss anybody. Susan has her hand raised.
I do. I didn't know it was Morgan's birthday, so happy birthday, Morgan. And I just don't want to leave you out, Julie, on the kudos for the website. I think all three of us have done a lot of work, and you've done a ton of write-ups and editing, and it's been a great committee. So I don't want to leave you out of that as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Andy has his hand up. Andy. Yes.
I'd like to say Happy New Year to all my colleagues. And also thank you to Bart for arranging a seamless remote experience tonight. Everything worked perfectly. Thank you so much.
Well, then that's split 50-50 with Miss Ellinger.
Thank you, Susan.
Yes, and Morgan is clapping. I'm just going to point that out because yeah, it's nice to see. And yes, happy birthday, Morgan. I know it's a public meeting, but I'm still going to just say we miss you and happy birthday. And I also just want to echo Andy's comments. It was fabulous. And, you know, it's really easy to overlook when things go seamlessly. And so I appreciate Andy like kind of calling that out because it did go really nicely and our executive session went smoothly. And that's a challenge on good days. So I appreciate you guys, just whatever you did that worked. Appreciate you. And any other good of the orders?
Happy birthday, Morgan.
Okay. And I will just say, I really appreciate you all being here. You know, sometimes it gets lonely in between these meetings, and it's really nice to come together and see your faces, see your passion, see your interest. It really helps revitalize me, and just want you all to know that though we have frustrations in our commission, I think we also have a lot of successes and a lot of really great people that we work with, and you guys all make it worthwhile to be here. So thank you.
Here.
And with that, I will accept a motion for adjournment and a second.
So moved.
Okay,
I will second that.
excellent. All right. Well, thank you. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Good night,
This
everyone.
meeting's adjourned. Good night.
Good night.